just wanted to thank everyone for attending the security webinar. So this is going to be a general security webinar, but with a focus on remote working. Please, as we go through this, sound out with questions. Alex, wingman here, is going to be helping me, because last time I was getting questions and it was distracting me. So Alex will be answering questions, and I might call upon him as he's really a subject matter expert far above my capability on this. So yeah, what we're going to do is we're going to kick off with some polls. Just so you know, no one else will see your answers, so don't fret. Be as honest as possible with the polls. This is good for us while we're learning how to, I guess, do these webinars and how to cater our language during this webinar and in future webinars as well. So yeah, so don't be afraid to put information, questions as we go. I think is there a chat function as well? It's something like that, isn't there?
Yeah, there should be a chat function down the bottom, so you can send us private messages if required.
Yeah, and you can send them out to everyone, I'd imagine, as well. So don't be shy. It's good to have a bit of chat, yeah, if there's anything missed or any concerns, then let us know. I should also say that as you know, everyone's working from home for now, so I never know, I might have interruptions from my daughter or wife. These are the things that happen in the new world. So yeah, why don't you kick off with the first poll, Alex?
Sure, we got the first poll just on security threats, just to see what your understanding of, or what you think your understanding of the security threats in IT are out there today.
And if you think you're an expert, but you're a bit shy to say it, just own it.
All right, we've got most people with the votes in. 1 or 2 more seconds there. It looks good. So I'll share the results with everyone because it's always interesting to know.
Interesting myself.
There we go.
Okay, that's good. That's a good sign. There's one expert. Love to know who that is, but don't know. So what we are going to do is we are going to try and cater this for both. So whilst a good chunk of the people here are, know a bit, hopefully there'll be things in here when we're going through the various cases that you will learn as well. And then for people that know very little, hopefully it will get you up to speed. And as we delve into the more complex, the remote working differences and what that's brought to the world. So let's continue. What we're going to be covering today, we're going to be covering the importance of. I didn't introduce myself, or Alex, excuse me, just realised. So I'm Conan from the IT team, I'm the general manager, and I have been part of the IT team since the beginning. I've got a bit of a technical background, but not so much anymore, so I do more damage than good. And Alex is here. He's one of our key engineers, bit of a subject matter expert on this, and will be answering the tough questions and chiming in for the key parts. So yeah, thanks for joining.
Sure, send through any questions, by the way. More than happy to give them a go live.
Try and get them stuck on something. Okay, so what we're covering today: importance of security, an overview of the variety and different types of threats that do exist, and they're broad and they're often changing in their relevancy. It's very different to what it was 10 years ago. Real life examples of breach attempts, we've got a few of those as we go through that are quite interesting to see. And then importantly, remote working and its impact. Yeah, we need to highlight that as it's a key part of the relevancy now, but it's on the back of existing threats and security concerns. Protection measures you need to take and how you can get started, and then some training options for your team. So just a little bit about the IT team for those that don't know, formed in 2011, been using a lot of Office 365, which does, most people attending this webinar are likely using Office 365, perhaps not all, but it is an important part of this, and some of the things we're talking about apply to Office 365, but also other technologies. We provide managed services, wide range of, and generally every IT services, if it's got IT, if it plugs in, turns on, we deal with it. We do get asked to support some unusual things sometimes, and we provide IT services to New Zealand and Australian organisations. So, jumping into security. A few facts. I'm not going to read all of these, but there's a huge amount of money in cyber crime. Probably, apart from the challenge around its legality, it's probably one of the fastest growing potential enterprises out there. You've got 600 billion lost each year, and that's growing. This data is probably a year old. And it is starting to, and it's growing. It's massively growing. What people, cybercrime 10 to 15 years ago used to be about people building these viruses for the reputational impact and their own personal, I guess, their own personal reputation amongst the community. And then what happened about 15 to 10 years ago, particularly 10 years ago, is they pivoted to start to make a lot of money. The average age of a cyber criminal was about 17. So yeah, it's probably not a surprise to anyone, but that these kids can make a lot of money. So yeah, it is a big enterprise, and it's growing. And unfortunately, we as business owners and people in business, employees and individuals, consumers, whatever you want to call us, are not getting better necessarily at protecting ourselves and stopping money from going to these guys. So it's a growing challenge. A few stats. This is pre-COVID stats. So more than a third of New Zealand businesses have been hacked in the past year. 42% of businesses expect their organisation to be hacked in the next year, which is probably a fair call. 1 in 3 New Zealand businesses haven't really assessed the impact that it could happen to their organisation. And only half of businesses are aware of the upcoming New Zealand Privacy Bill changes. And the big one there is mandatory breach notification, which we'll touch on soon, which is a big deal. And it's a big change for what we've had before, where effectively if you get breached, most people just keep it to themselves. Some major breaches that you may or may not have heard of, and you may have been using some of these services, hopefully not all of them, and so some of your records may have been breached already without you realizing it. So Carbonac phishing attack, Yahoo was a big one, Adult Friend Finder was another one, eBay, obviously a big organization, Equifax and Ashley Madison was quite a high profile one as well a couple of years ago. I don't know if I've spelled that right, but yeah. So these are some big ones. And what they did was they obtained, sometimes they didn't obtain credit card information, but they often obtained the data that was held in their profiles, which was sometimes sensitive information, but often email addresses, passwords in some cases, the secret question and answer that some of these things have for password resets. A lot of these were obtained. In some cases, credit card information, which is pretty freaky. Now, why is it important? This is a key thing to consider, is data is valuable. It's usually not your credit card or your banking information that people are after when they're looking at a breach. And the key thing is they like to lead up to it. So, but data is very valuable. If you're an organization that works with either the Ministry of New Zealand or the Australian equivalents of the Ministry of Justice, the Ministry of Health, the data on your clients, patients, whatever you want to call them, whatever you should call them, is very, very valuable and sensitive. And so it is very important that we are mindful of that. Then for the average organization, average business, productivity impact is major, financial impact can be very big. And it's often we sometimes focus on that, the financial impact, and forget about the others. And then the reputational impact can be very big. So key thing to note is one breach likely leads to further breaches. A low impact, a simple basic phishing attack, and I'll talk more about that soon, is often to create an opportunity for a higher impact breach. So we're just going to now go into some of the common breaches that you may know of, and you may know a bit about, you may know a lot about, but we're just going to cycle through them, talk about what they are, give some examples, and in some cases we're going to give some high level things you can do to improve them. Then we're going to circle back to that at the end of this webinar. So phishing, hopefully, I'd expect everyone on this webinar has heard of phishing. There's a phishing poll, isn't there, Alex? Is this one we should put up now or at the end of the phishing sequence?
No, we can do it. We can do it now.
Okay, we're just going to put up a phishing poll now. As we said earlier, no one will see your answer, so please don't feel embarrassed. It's a very common thing. We saw the stats earlier. I've fallen victim to one, which I was ridiculed by my friends because apparently it was obvious. This was a while ago, but it does happen. Probably shouldn't have said that, actually.
All right, we've got a good number of results in.
Sorry, actually, I can't tick yes. Yep.
So let's end it there and share the results.
Yep. Okay, what do we have? So yes, no, and have seen them but haven't fallen victim one. Okay, so it's sort of a good mix there. So just continuing on with these, just to keep it going. So phishing, for those that are not sure about what it is, it's really, and it's quite general, and you would have seen them even, I'd say you've seen them even if you didn't realize, hopefully you realized, but it's an imitation email. It's generally an email that's imitating a reputable company, a genuine company, sometimes Microsoft, sometimes Xero. These are common ones that you'll see, Netflix. And the idea is to get you to reveal personal information such as passwords and credit cards. Usually it's a little bit of a Trojan horse where you click the link in the email, it goes to a fake website, and then you enter your genuine username and password accidentally, and then they have that. This is the most common and popular type of security threat out there. In 2005, it was a worm. 2005 to 7 to 8, there were worm viruses that used to spread across networks. 2011 to 2015, maybe 2014, it was ransomware. It's still a big thing today, and we come back to that. And nowadays, the most likely and successful and really impactful security breach type is phishing. So yeah, just go through some more examples. This is just a very basic example. I think this is one that we have generated, Alex, for our test system, for our phishing trial, is it? Or phishing simulator, is that correct?
No, I think that one's real.
Okay, well, why has it got my email? Where'd you get that from? Anyway,
your email account.
So thank you for that, Alex. This is a deactivation scare, and it's one that obviously a lot of organizations using Office 365, so they've started to target Office 365. So here you have, it comes to me apparently. Sometimes it will display an image or not, but it looks a little bit weird, to be honest, but sometimes people are expecting something, isn't expecting a change or a password reset, and so they can fall for this more likely. It says 365 account. Now, yeah, I might pick it up, but it's easy not to. And then you click that link, and it's going to go to a fake site that will look very legit. It'll look like an Office 365 login page, and you'll enter your details, and boom, you're in trouble. So that is how it plays out. Just continuing along. Another one is a PDF attachment. Now you might go, well, it's a PDF attachment. If it's bad, it should be picked up by the filtering systems. But generally, the PDF is not dangerous. There will be a link, a clickable object inside the PDF that you can click, and it'll take you to another dodgy website. Apple ID support is a very, very common one because people get them. I'm not sure about you if you use Apple mobile phones or whatever, you might get them unexpectedly, and so we're kind of used to seeing random Apple or iTunes emails, and so that is one reason why people fall victim to them. Recently, related to the current situation, there is COVID phishing attempts. So trying to appearing to look like World Health Organization, trying to get donations, and even if it's not about the money, it's about it's about trying to get people to click the link, but they also do take money, which is going to go to the scammers. So yeah, they don't stop. COVID phishing. Continuing on from the other one, there is several. And you may have heard of these phishing attempts that are circulating around related to COVID, which is sometimes around saying that there are infections in your region, which we show soon. safety measures that you can click on, they're circulating around, and it is a bit of a shame. And probably they were bigger and more successful in sort of late March, but they are still occurring, trying to steal personal information as usual. So here would be one of them. As you can see, if you can see my mouse, this looks pretty legit if they had the name in there next to dear. I can imagine looking at this and not believing that it's a fake message. The link is very legitimate looking, but the key thing here is if you hover over this one, it then shows a link that is not legitimate. So the text in the email that has the link is actually faking. What's the terminology for that, Alex?
The text, the hyperlink is different to the text. Yeah.
Okay. I thought there might have been a cool name for that, but anyway.
Sorry.
So yeah, as you may know, sometimes these emails, these phishing attempts, have shocking spelling and grammar, but they're starting to get better. And this is an example where it does look like someone that speaks very good English has proofread it, and that is important, and it does go a long way. So text message scams, this is an example, particularly over in Australia, and they have these links that are being texted out en masse about regional potential, outbreaks of COVID-19 and test locations, and these things install apps, install software that can be dodgy. And so, I haven't checked the link or anything like that, and I encourage you not to, but this has been a big thing in the last sort of 30 days. Also, you may have heard of this one, fake coronavirus maps, downloading the map onto their devices, workstations generally, and it has been malware. So yeah, these are examples. Obviously, this was bigger a month or so ago, and it's just quite cool information. I saw a lot of these maps, and obviously we like visual data as these breaches were growing and growing, and so they are targeting what we are most likely to be interested in. So the fixes for phishing, or the prevention measures, we should say, user education. This is a really big one. So it sort of starts there. We often want tools, things like antiviruses and malware filtering systems and email and firewalls and various things like that to do the protection for us. But with these, for phishing is really social engineering, and we need to use education to try and be our first barrier. Multi-factor authentication is big. The reason is that if you do make an error and you click on something and you give your password over, MFA, 2FA, two-factor authentication, multi-factor authentication is an exceptional, second layer of defense that will stop your credentials, even if they have them, from being used to access your email and other services. Mail filtering systems are still very good, and set up well can make a big difference. And DNS filtering, i.e. Cisco Umbrella, or for customers, Security Stack, as that includes a few different options, is very powerful for that. If someone makes an error and clicks on something and enters their credentials, or potentially to stop that, these tools can help. Spear phishing. So the difference between phishing and spear phishing, or whaling, is kind of quite a cool term, I guess, is really about, it's a more targeted approach, targeting valuable individuals, often sending from people perceived to be valuable and to people perceived to be valuable. So it's both ways, but the common one is sending between a financial controller and a CEO, and one of them is fake. And the idea is to try and get money out of them, and a lot of money. It's a bit more targeted. It's a bit more, they are generally learning about the organization and trying to understand it before sending out information, as opposed to common phishing attempts, which are just spam, widespread, and a bit of a shotgun approach. So they're harder to spot. They often look like they're coming from within the organization, and there are ways to protect your organization and show external emails, but they're often not that good. And what we find is that, I'm sure some of you might have seen, when you're replying to someone, particularly in large organizations, it will often have text in there that says this is coming from an external email address. The challenge is after a while people become numb to that because they just see it all the time. But there are things that you can do to protect it. But the key thing is with spear phishing is that the aim is to get information about your organization, credentials, financial information, personally identifiable information about your customers, and IP, which is a big one, or trade secrets. So usually, and we've got an example coming up, it's trying to get payment, trying to get information, and it does look like it is from a member of your staff. So if you've had an email from a colleague or one of your CEOs that's asking for payment, this is what they call spear phishing. So this is an example. So an email from the IT team CEO Sue to our financial controller, and this is not exactly one, but it is what it would. It's a simulated one. Now, at first glance, it looks fine. Usually it's something along this, keeping it simple, often saying from an iPhone. That is the common thing, even if you don't have an iPhone. Short and sharp about something, and almost designed to create a little bit of fear in the staff member. Now, you could look at this here and see that there is a email address that is fake. But if you're doing it from a mobile phone, or you're not focusing on it, you could miss that. It's very easy to miss that information. So this is an example, and we've changed some of the names, but it is a legitimate example that we have seen and we have taken from an engagement. I believe this might have been a customer of a while ago, but so here we go, CEO fraud. So this email was from the hacker. Are you handling an international payment this morning? We have one pending. Please feel free to read the text. Let me know when to send bank details. So it's trying to create a sense of urgency to Susan Brown, who's the financial person. Susan comes back and says, caught up in a project here now. So Susan is a legitimate person, I should say. Can I help? Next one, can you handle this right now? Was very busy. This is the thing. Urgency is occurring all the time. Just got back, can help it. Bit of a drama going on here. Very busy day. The amount is 62,120. I'm not sure where that number came from. It is very late for the transfer. Can you get it done today? Susan wants to help. She's a good employee, wants to do her bit. Is asking if it's ready to go, because the process that they have is that it will be placed by him into PC banking and she would authorize it. John, who doesn't exist and is not, probably doesn't even know this is going on. I can't do this. I'm not able to upload it. My day is really tight. Can you send out the bank details still? Can the payment go out? Then Susan says, I can do it. Do it home tonight. Send me the details and I'll circumvent the standard process and get this set up, which is what they're trying to do. Continuing on, John Smith goes back, puts in the details, international thing, and says, send me the payment slip once it's complete. Susan then deposits the money and it's gone. And that might seem crazy, and you might think our organization could not fall for this, but this does happen, and we have seen it, and we've seen it multiple times. So key things with this. A view of the email address would have revealed the fraud, but it is easy to miss that. We are busy, we are not focusing, we may be looking at it on a mobile phone where it's not popping up and revealing the email address so easily. And when you're not, it's easy when you're expecting these. Everyone watching this webinar, look at it and spot the errors. But when you're not playing Where's Wally with a bad email, you're just doing your job, you're often not focusing on that. So poor use of language is often a thing. Mistakes, usually the people that are writing these are not, English is not their first language. There is a sense of urgency. That is a big thing. They're asking for a change to procedure. There's no second channel of verification. And the no question culture is a big thing. Without naming names, where this fails mostly is when there is a bit of fear between the CEO and the finance or admin people. If the CEO is someone that is feared in an organization, that sounds a bit dramatic, but that people are concerned about questioning or challenging. this is more likely to happen. So if you have to make sure that there is a culture in your organization of questioning to help this, and that if a procedure is changed, that doesn't matter who it is, people will ask why, are you sure this is not the standard way we do it, and try and challenge it. So, and you got to understand that as soon as, just going back to the email, as soon as Susan responded to John, the first time, which is why the hacker didn't put too much information in the first message, then Susan's less likely to pick up that it's a false email, because it's just coming through as John and she's replying to it, and it's part of an email chain. So trying to get that initial response is part of this fraud. So long game. This is a bit elaborate. So is that right? Yes. Okay. So I've got to talk through this example. I believe there's some text somewhere. Yeah. So this was an example of a company we know, and we've changed all the names. But this was quite an exceptional situation that we thought it's important to talk through. So try and explain it as best I can, because it was a few years ago. But the company Great Apples, which was the contractor to Weird Cider, was hacked by an innocent looking phishing attempt, which is one of those ones that I'm sure a lot of you would see, which is an email that goes around and it basically says, click this link. I can't remember I haven't seen them very often, but for a time, but there's a common one that often is Office 365 related or something else. It comes from what it legitimately comes from an email of one of your contacts that is a legitimate contact, and as opposed to a fake one. And you click the link and then enter your account information, and then generally what they do is they then take your contact list or your recent contacts and spam out to the next load, and it's like some sort of weird chain mail thing. And often people go, oh, that's embarrassing, I was hacked. Email those people, apologize, and just forget about it. What people don't understand is that those hackers actually usually create a backdoor into that email account, ideally holding on to the credentials, if not forwarding emails to another address. We've come across clients, and a year after they were breached, have found that financial information from BNZ, Westpac, ANZ, all the financial institutes in New Zealand, were set up as default rules to forward mail across to a hacker's address. And so they were setting up something, they were trying to gain information. But so what happened is, Great Apples, the contractor, had their email breached innocently. So the hacker had access via an innocent phishing attempt. When I say innocent, I mean it didn't look too nasty and it didn't seem to impact the user. They had access to all the emails and they continued to have it, and they lay dormant for several months reviewing the behaviors. And then interestingly, the hacker registered a domain with this party, which was Weird Cider, because they were trading a lot financially. There was a lot of information and invoices going back and forth of high sums. So they registered the domain with a minor spelling error to create a trick for this Great Apples organization. So what happened? There were emails going back and forth. Great Apples sends invoices and information to Weird Cider. Weird Cider sends payments to Great Apples. So what happened was very interesting, and I'm going to have to talk through it because it's not explained here. But Great Apples received an email. Great Apples was hacked. So the hacker used the legitimate email account of Great Apples to email Weird Cider and say, my payment information has changed. Can you please make this payment? I think that was it, wasn't it? Was that, Alex? Or have I got it around the wrong way? Anyway, so that's what happened.
You got it around the wrong way, but yeah.
Sorry. Okay. So yeah, Weird Cider. That's it. So Weird Cider had an incorrect email address. It was incorrect domain. It was had a spelling mistake. They emailed Great Apples and said, please, here is an invoice for payment. Great Apples then responded to the legitimate Weird Cider email but it was blocked by the hacker, and they obtained it. And yeah, the long and short of it is, because I've mucked up the explanation, is they were intercepting the emails, sent an invoice that was expected, but changed the account information. So it was a Kiwi Bank account with, but it was the hacker had set it up. Apparently, Kiwi Bank are letting people set up accounts through automatic means online, and this led to an issue. The contractor then paid the amount, thinking it was for Weird Cider, and actually it was going into the hacker's account. There were questions going back and forth, but they were being intercepted. And in the end, something like $50,000 was deposited into a hacker. They put it from Kiwi Bank to a bank in Australia to a bank in Hong Kong. So the key thing is for this is, just continuing along. Oh, there's a lot more here. So the key points: smart thinking from the hacker. They registered a similar domain. They had a lot of patience. They were reviewing the payment behavior to make sure they got the timing down. They changed the procedure, but they were able to intercept the emails and be in control of the dialogue. They were blocking emails from Weird Cider, who were saying, where is our payment? So they were saying, where is our payment? And those were being blocked. And effectively being hidden to the contractor, so they wouldn't realize what was going on. So there was a lot of things like that were happening. Incredibly intelligent, and I think the biggest learning for us that we've started to talk to people about is, if you have someone ask you to change bank details, you should consider what verification you can have there, because traditionally people would just change that, but we've seen it as a source of a breach. So potential fixes for this: DMARC with DKIM. Alex, do you want to briefly explain that?
Sure. So yeah, a lot of the time, like in this previous example, they actually register a separate domain, but a lot of the time they won't go to that length. And what they'll do is they'll just spoof. So they'll pretend to be another email address on the other side. So it's very, very easy to spoof an email. You can actually use the exact domain as another one. Anyone can do it. And email systems were originally built around trust, but obviously the internet is not a place where you trust people. So relatively recently, within the last few years, there's a new technology called DMARC, which basically stops people from being able to spoof your email address. It basically makes sure that the servers that are sending out email are your servers, and provides a verification method to the person receiving the email that you are who you say you are. It's a little bit of setup, but it's well worth it, because it can basically stop spoofing overnight.
And monitoring as well. It's a bit of monitoring.
Yeah, it also provides monitoring, so you can see if your email address is being spoofed around the world.
If you're interested in learning more about this, we've got some information at the end, and we can talk to you about mail filtering systems. The ones in Office 365 do a fair amount. ATP is pretty good as well. And then user education, again, it's a big one. Talking to them about these situations and how they happen can help. All right, ransomware. So you may have seen this. The thing is, ransomware is, the definition of it is a type of malware that basically, I'll explain it. It's like a virus. A piece of software is run on the computer. It doesn't necessarily need to be installed, and it locks all documents on the workstation or server. There's a lot of different variations, but this was a big one, probably around about, this is a couple of years, 3 years ago, according to the date, but they were big in sort of the mid to early 2010s. And they generally would request Bitcoin payments. They've got a bit of help on there for people. So there's a contact us, which is pretty amusing, and there is generally a phone number that you can call, and it's probably an outsourced help service desk, which is somewhat amusing, but this is a legitimate thing, and it was a big money maker for hackers. It has fallen out of popularity a little bit because they've found that phishing and that type of security attempts are more successful, but it can still have big impact. Antivirus tools generally don't pick them up because they're not traditional viruses, and often if they do pick them up, they'll pick them up too late. Are you going to say something else?
Yeah, I'm not sure if you mentioned it later, so apologies if you do. Yeah, not only do the ransomware demand payment, sometimes they will demand to release information. So they might have had some information, they've siphoned it out of your server systems, and they say, if you don't pay us, we're going to make this public. We're going to give it to the media, or we're going to post it on Facebook or whatever.
Yeah, and I can say, and that might not seem great, but we have paid ransoms in the past. So we had a client that had this happen to their home machine, and it had a lot of photos, and we assisted them with the payment of that ransom, bought the Bitcoin from some unusual person in Rickerton. And yeah, it wasn't the greatest experience because they wanted all this information from us, which was kind of pretty frustrating. But we managed to pay the ransom, and it's automated. So you pay the ransom, they just released all the docs, and then went on our merry way. But it was expensive. I think it was about $3,000 of ransomware at the time. $3,000 of Bitcoin.
Yeah,
But
and a
yeah,
lot of the time they do work. So paying the ransom does actually work, because if if it doesn't work, then people stop paying their ransoms. So
not great for the
yeah,
business model if it
no.
doesn't work. All right, so I'll just continue. I'll just skip over this one. The ransomware it's generally software. You download an executable, and it will run, but it doesn't need to install, which is actually a big one. And it will encrypt it and change the files. The first time we ever encountered ransomware, we actually thought the workstation was being corrupted because we couldn't access the files, but actually they were being encrypted. I'll just box through this one. So the thing about ransomware is the recovery effort can be the big impact. Often it takes days. It's very quick to perform for the ransomware to encrypt things, but to recover it can take a very long time. Storing every file on your server or workstation can take a while. And productivity is generally crippled, even if you have backups. The mitigation, there's a number of ways. RDP is a vulnerability for ransomware, we would say, but generally we'd suggest that if you're using something like Office 365 for your documents, you are significantly more protected because it has built-in rollback and versioning that does have protection against ransomware, but there is still an impact. Phone call social engineering. So this is just a quick example. You might have heard of these before, trying to rob, innocent older ladies in New Zealand of their money. When you hear them, you realise they're just scammers and they're a bit stupid, but they do have an effect. What they're doing is they usually phone up. They say they're from Microsoft. They actually access the machine. I watched one in action once just because I was interested, and they ran this command prompt that was just rolling text over and said, "Oh no, your computer's infected." It was actually quite amusing. And they will generally ask for a payment via credit card, and they're somewhat successful, obviously. WEBCAM extortion scams, or sextortion. I'm sure a few of you have seen these. They're quite an amusing read, but they're generally asking for Bitcoin. The interesting thing about this is what's in the email is usually a password of yours that is a legitimate password you may have used in the past. And they use that to say we have access to your systems, and usually it's quite alarming to see your password alongside this other stuff. But what they've done is they've found a copy of one of the previous breaches that we'll come to soon, and taken the legit password and inserted it, and that allows people to become a little bit threatened. Now, the sites that give those legit passwords are some of these. So these are all credential breach places: LinkedIn, MySpace, Tumblr, Adobe, MyFitnessPal, and tons of others. Should we do this thing, Alex? I think we've got a bit of time. Yeah. So what we wanted to do is, this is very legitimate, I should say. Some of you might have heard this before, but this is a site would like everyone, if they're comfortable, you don't have to, you can grab a cup of tea if you want, but to go to the site called Have I Been Owned with a P.com, and feel free to enter your email address in there. And it's going to tell you if your credentials have been breached by one major breach. You're not entering any passwords, you're not entering anything else, you're just putting your email address in. Probably try your personal email if you want. But what we'd love for you to do is take a minute, go to that site on your browser while you're watching, and enter your email address. And we're going to put a bit of a poll up. and see if people have a few or breaches. I know when I've done it in the past, I've been quite surprised to see. It usually won't tell you your password; it'll just tell you. For example, mine said that I had an Adobe account that was breached a couple of years ago, which I didn't even know I had a damn Adobe account, but apparently I did. And so yeah, just down tools for a minute. Go to this website. Have I been owned with a PWENED.com and chuck your email address in.
You can also try several email addresses if you got a few as well, because you might be surprised which is being, they might even be different breaches for different websites.
And it's actually quite an informative site. That one, it will explain how it happened, where the breach occurred, what the risk is, what the threat level is, if there's passwords there. So while you're doing that, take a second, and then we're going to put up a poll. Okay, why don't we chuck up this poll?
Yeah, I'll put up the poll. The link's still in the chat if you want to, because I think this takes over the whole screen.
Can't vote.
Sorry.
That's right.
There's a button. I can press select your vote. You can just say what yours is if you want, Conan.
Yeah, I've got breaches, unfortunately.
Yeah, me too. I think I'm well over 6.
And I just want to say, this isn't a trick where we're going to say at the end, oh, you shouldn't have gone to that website and entered your information. This is a legitimate tool for your business or your personals to assess things.
I think we've got a good number through. We
Cool.
show the results.
Yep. Okay, green, no breaches known. Well done. 5 or less breaches, and a few with 6 or more. That's cool. So thank you for doing that. And it just shows that, sometimes we don't realize some of these breaches are not, on stuff and not on one news. And so we just don't know about it and don't circulate, around. And sometimes they get breached and then it takes a very long time for them to release the information. And it usually goes onto the dark web, which we might talk about soon. Okay, I'm going to push on because we are running a bit behind. What can you do? For protection, dark web monitoring is very good, and we'll come back to that a bit later. Avoid reusing passwords, particularly your personal. If you have personal accounts, MyFitnessPal was a big one. A lot of people, what we've found is that they use their personal, the same password, and even their work email for personal fitness tracking tools and that kind of thing. And then it's not about the fitness tracking tool that gets breached. It's about what they can use to breach other services. Make changes to your password manager setup or passwords if you're using password manager. And multi-factor authentication is always a very helpful tool. Just something we thought we'd put up to help. You might see people do these things on Facebook, LinkedIn, perhaps, hopefully not, but first job, current job, dream job, I know I see people doing it. Stop sending your potential passwords or memorable data to people who collect this for social engineering. That is the purpose of those things. They are not for something that a friend of yours has put up to try and reinvigorate your friendship. They have been passed up by someone, and the origin is an attempt to gather information. So if you see someone doing it, if a family is doing it, tell them, don't do that. It's just it's not good. Okay, remote working. Going to have to go through this quickly. My apologies. We're just running a little bit behind. What has changed? So for organizations that have had to rapidly get themselves into a remote working situation, using personal workstations is a thing. Using VPNs, perhaps where they weren't before, is currently a common method of access. Firewall and basic security settings on home machines is a bit of a risk. People using workstations that are not on the domain or the business domain, and lack of MFA because they've just had to rapidly deploy these systems quickly. Moreover, targeted phishing attempts, as we talked about earlier, related to remote working. people are more isolated and they're more likely to fall victim. And we talk about that in a moment. And then services like Zoom, and nothing wrong with Zoom, although we talk about that soon, are particularly vulnerable to phishing because these links going all over the place with Zoom meeting requests. And it's very easy to see a legitimate looking email and click on that link, particularly for people that are new to the Zoom thing and the remote working and conference calling thing. A couple of other things around data. If you have sensitive data in your organization, either IP or maybe patient or customer information, all data sensitive, it's just some data is more sensitive than others. Is it being stored where it shouldn't be? Maybe a home machine, maybe somewhere else, a temporary arrangement, but it might not be ideal and you may need to consider it. Storing business docs on personal workstations. And then if you rapidly set up something like Dropbox or Teams, it may be that you haven't dealt with the permission structure very well. Isolation is a big thing around remote working. So users are currently isolated, your colleagues, your staff. They can't ask for help or roll their chair over to a peer as they previously would, and so they're less likely to ask for help or seek collaboration. An example of a security breach would be an email comes in, usually it would pop up and someone might say, does that look dodgy? Do you think that that person is going to call someone and share their screen? Maybe, but probably not. It's just not a common thing. People don't want to bother other people or look stupid. And so the natural chatter, or what can happen is an email can come into everyone and someone says, oh, look at that, we've got this dodgy email. And then someone else says, yeah, I got it too. You don't get that when you're in an isolated environment. It's more difficult to determine when users are struggling technically with these technologies, and therefore those people are going to be more vulnerable because they may not get the help that they need. Approvals. So in an office, if someone needs to make a payment and they get something a bit unusual, like the example we showed before, they would go over and ask, hey, is this legit? Did you want me to do this? Whereas now they're via email and they would actually have to do a call, a video call or a phone call and say, hey, did you actually make this payment? And they're less likely to. I think just the chances of a situation where people are not as connected are just far higher. In an emergency situation, lapses are understandable and we need to bring our standards back. Quick wins. First is for workstations. Ensure minimum protection on home workstations if you have them. If people are using home workstations or shared machines, antivirus separate accounts. Make sure the workstations are up to date. Firewalls enabled. Get MFA operational. Look at the permission structures. Consider the options around phishing as we talked about. Consider your policies for staff, and we'll come back to that in a moment. Encourage more check-ins and verifications, and encourage sharing of experiences like, if things happen around technical stuff. Jumping into video calling. So Zoom, Teams, Skype, and Messenger video are all being broadly used now where they may not have been before. Zoom's gone from 10 million daily users to 200 million. If you bought shares in Zoom into December, you're probably doing all right. Rapid uptake from users and organizations, easy to get started. Little training is needed and given, which is a challenge. Struggling users are more isolated, as we mentioned before, and there are issues with tech and lack of understanding of security, and the issues are heightened because if someone struggles with it, they're less likely to understand when it's a dodgy email or some dodgy situation. Zoom bombing, I'm not sure if anyone's heard of this, but it's what happens when strangers jump on meetings. So the way that Zoom works is generally meetings are all open, but you've got to know the name, the number, the ID. And so the ID, the name of the meeting, so to speak, is kind of traditionally been the security, and by default there's no password, and it can be quite difficult to add a password in many cases. And so people just jumped in. So this was a good example. You may have heard of this. Boris Johnson put up a photo on Twitter of a Zoom meeting, and the thing is he left the Zoom meeting ID, and so hundreds of people jumped into the meeting because you could join it. And obviously a bit of a security threat because some of them probably joined before they realized that people had been joining. So they've changed a few things. I won't go into all this. They've made some changes to improve it. The default settings around passwords are there, and waiting rooms. But the big thing is they're going to make some big changes in the next 90 days. Microsoft Teams, we'd say a little bit more secure than Zoom, although, not talking bad about Zoom, it is a good tool. They haven't had as much of a jump in daily users. The security is a bit tighter because it's not just some service that people use just for Zoom, or they have one password and they share it around or whatever. It's part of the email address. It's the same password and it has the same security. And then just generally, it's not as public. You have to invite people, that kind of thing. Continuing on, dark web. I'm not going to talk too much about the dark web stuff. The main thing I wanted to discuss around the dark web is it's really generally when there is a breach of your data, or a company like LinkedIn or MyFitnessPal or whatever, it will be stored on the dark web, and then others will come along and either buy it or have open access to it and use that to try and do a further breach. And that's what it's about. There is dark web monitoring, and that's something we could talk about. I was going to do an example where I picked a New Zealand business and did a scan and showed you all how it works, but we've just run out of time. Thanks, Pam. Few things, just some protection measures to consider. Software updates are key. Make sure your machines are updated. Obviously, IT team customers will have that done. Secure your devices. Make sure you've got some form of anti-malware, although anti-malware software is not as helpful as it once was. In the 2000s, having Trend Micro or whatever was the key thing, but now it is a bit different, but it is still important.
Just to say there, make sure that you've got it on people's personal machines if they're using that, especially because they can be missed. Yeah.
Backups, whilst the situation around backups is changing, it is still very valuable to have a backup, particularly for the things that we don't anticipate. And backups for Office 365 data is something to consider, because whilst they have their own built-in backups, it's not perfect, and it doesn't often have the retention that we often need. Network, making sure your networks are secure, not open. RDP is a vulnerability, remote access, that kind of thing. Logs, making sure that logs are turned on. Office 365 doesn't have security logs, advanced security logs turned on by default, and it is important. If you're concerned, please ask us about that. Default credentials, making sure they're updated is a key thing. Protection measures, things can go wrong. No matter how well you prepare. Security, we often talk about security like if you have a building, you can put as much locks on it, as much security cameras, as many doors. If someone really wants to get in, they'll bring it. Could bring a tank. They could get in. It's not to say that you're going to be breached, but it's just that there are limitations to what you can do, and you're just best to have as many layers as you can to make sure you're a bit of a deterrent. Require notifications from staff. This is just another thing to mention. This is going to be more important as we go on, but you need to consider that sometimes breaches will occur. People, what they do is they get one of these phishing attempts and they click the link and they type in their password and it doesn't work. It doesn't pop up and say, you have been breached. This was a phishing attempt. So people type it in and it doesn't work and they just go, oh, that was weird. Okay. And then and maybe they don't want to be embarrassed, so they don't tell. Require notifications from staff if they have something happen. Maybe they think it's just an innocent one and it's a bit embarrassing and it just emailed a few of their colleagues or contacts, but usually the underlying situation is something far more serious. And so we suggest you talk to your staff about saying it is mandatory in some way, and we could discuss what this conversation looks like, to have notification if you are the victim of something, or you accidentally enter your information somewhere, or you lose your laptop, your personal laptop, and it has data on it. Policies are important. Response plan and breach notification, this is important. The Privacy Act is going to be changing very soon. And it's going to have something called compulsory notification. If your organization or you have data and it is breached, or you have a breach and you're not certain of what's happened to that data, you are going to have to notify anyone that you have information on by it's going to be compulsory legally. You have to notify them that you've been breached. And that's a big change. And there's huge financial penalties if you don't. So this is going to be big. So I think building a plan there, okay, if we have email of one staff member breached, what do we do? Well, we need to notify anyone that could have information in their emails, which is pretty extensive. So consider that. Different measures, MFA, DKIM, as we talked about, DNS filtering like Cisco Umbrella, 365 backup is a big one. Using the quarantine system in Office 365, it does need to be set up and need to be managed by someone, but it is valuable. Azure AD, if you don't have a domain controller, can be beneficial. Reviewing your Office 365 score. If you're a customer of ours, feel free to talk to us about that. Quick wins, basically the same thing, but additional things is using an SSTP VPN if you need one, improving your password complexity, try and get rid of personal workstations from your organization if they're shared with other family members. user training, and work on the culture side of things. Whoops. Training. Consider the wider team. It's not just about you. You might be really savvy, but your wider team may be a little bit on the weaker side. People are the weakest point to security. It's not the systems. It's usually the people these days. Most organizations fall victim at some point of phishing attacks. So you might feel like your team are really savvy and everything, but it can happen to anyone. You need a culture of questioning, a culture of discussion and openness, that it's not a massive shameful thing to have a breach. It can happen, and it's easy to do it. We don't always have our guard up. Training on the at-home risks and training on the different types of threats. So that's a big one. If people know about these different types, they might be more likely to understand them and pick them up. Phishing simulators can be a really good educator. So doing a phishing simulation that is supposed to be something, a tool that you use, maybe Xero, maybe Office 365, maybe something else. You don't want to make it, you want to make it at least look like it is a fish, because you can do a phishing simulator, that simulation that is perfect, and it can be a little bit harsh, but we tend to build in a few clues that resemble what an actual phishing attempt would look like. Individual or classroom style sessions are available. Catered to your organization is often a good way, and we're thinking of putting on a webinar for users if interested. Come back to this soon. Where to from here? Keep us posted on what you're seeing. We really like to see what our customers and contacts are seeing out there. If you have an experience historically and you'd be willing to share, we don't need to name names or anything. We'd love to hear it. If you'd like information on any of these, please let us know. And if you're interested in a further session for your users, let us know on the form. So I should explain that. We're thinking of doing a webinar style, but for users as opposed to key contacts. So it will be a live training session. We would go through these, go through examples, and not talk about what something is, but talk about how it works and what to be wary of. And if you are interested in that, please let us know on the form. Yes, Lloyd, I'll answer that question shortly. So common questions, just a few quick answers. What's the single most impactful thing you could do today? We would say MFA. If you don't have MFA, get it. If you have it, get it across all users. It is definitely the best thing. Would we recommend Teams or Zooms for remote working? Look, I think Teams, we don't have anything against Zoom. It's actually a really good product. Teams is likely to be more secure, just in the way it's going to be have the layered security you already have with Office 365, but there is a preference here. If you're already using Zoom, you might not want to change, but feel free to talk to us about it. How important is antivirus? It's not as important as it was, but I should say it is not the level of protection that you may have thought it is. If on your home machine you've got Norton 360 or whatever the hell it is, it's not going to help you as much as you think it is. But you should still have it. It's like a key in your door. You'll still want it, even though there are ways to get around it. How important is Cisco Umbrella, part of security stack? Very. When people fall victim to a phishing attempt, it's sometimes a thing that stops them from being connected to the site that is going to take their credentials. It's a very important tool. Are backups still important? Yes, they are. And it does depend on the value of your data and how long. Sometimes, like the IT team, the way that we work, if we lost a large portion of our documents, it wouldn't be as big as a company that has sensitive data, processes, and everything like that. We could live without it. And I think we have backups, but we don't go back 2 years. So I'd consider that backups are very important, and you should consider them for 365. If you haven't, it's a bit of an unusual one because 365 has built-in backups, but it is something to consider. So question time. I know we're a bit short of time, and I'm sorry for rushing the second half of that presentation, but we got a bit stuck on some of the phishing stuff. So questions. There's one that I've already talked about, which is we have our system locked down by the IT team. No one can download anything without going through you. So can we be hit by ransomware? The short answer Simon, is yes. The interesting thing about ransomware is we could say that ransomware that exists currently is very unlikely to breach your systems. But what happens is sometimes a vulnerability is picked up in the Microsoft operating system or the mobile phone operating system, and they get ransomware out to exploit that vulnerability quickly. So education and behavioral stuff is often the protection against those 0-day exploits that come out. But the challenges with ransomware, or the impressive thing with ransomware, is it generally doesn't need to be installed. So people can download it and run it like a PDF. You're executing a PDF, people can run it. Some systems will stop it, and Windows 10 is better than it used to be, but you're not completely protected. Continuing on, given the published or unpublished issues for Zoom, is Teams better from a cybersecurity perspective? Just like I talked about before, I think I'm not suggesting that everyone should change from Zoom to Teams. Zoom are doing a lot, but Teams, if you're already using Microsoft 365, is likely to be powerful. Do you want to answer Clinton's question, Alex?
Yeah, so Clinton, you've been using a password manager for many years. You're surprised that there's a lot of people use the same passwords for a lot of their web accounts. Yeah, that is a definite problem, massive problem. It's called horizontal credential usage. So you have one account compromised over here. They use the same password, and then in their work account or their Gmail account or their bank, and then the hackers are in. So a lot of people have Gmail accounts, and if you get a Gmail account or an email account, then you can reset the passwords for everything else. So yes, definitely do consider using a password manager, or consider having multiple passwords at the very least, and recording somehow where you have which password, so you can go and reset it if it's breached. But yeah, the only way to be absolutely secure is to have a completely different password on every service.
Cool. Boris, is Boris not edited before he goes out on Twitter? He mustn't be. Or his editor didn't pick it up either, which is understandable. That's probably more. Lloyd, we can share the slides after the session. We're welcome to. We'll do a recording. Sometimes we haven't got those done just because we've been doing quite a few of these and it's been a bit chaotic, but we will make sure we do that in the next day or so.
Awesome.
That is all for questions. Thank you very much for attending, people. And please fill in your forms and feedback at the end. We really do appreciate it. This is something we're doing more of, and we're still learning and improving. And yeah, we'd love to have your honest feedback. And please let us know if there are any things you would like to see. We're doing these quite regularly now, and we have a bit of a backlog that we're trying to get through of ideas and I guess webinar concepts that we had promised, but the one to your users we're keen to do if there's a bit of an uptake. Thank you very much, everyone. Do take care, have a nice day, and enjoy the weekend.